Greetings, everybody. This is Matty Boomsticks coming at you with my very first video game review. This is a new endeavor for me, so I hope you like what you see. But without any further ado, let's get into it. Today, I'll be checking out Industria. Developed by German and Scottish-based indie developer Bleakmill Studios and published by Head Up Games, Industria is an atmospheric and story-rich first-person shooter action-adventure game initially set in Cold War East Germany, but later takes you on a journey to an alternate timeline and reality, the city of
Walter!
Hakavik. It was released on September 30th, 2021, and at the time of posting is available for PC only. Just as a disclaimer, I consider this to be a spoiler-free review, but I'll be discussing some gameplay and story elements. Those sensitive to spoilers may consider this spoilerish territory, so if that's you, proceed at your own risk. What makes Industria particularly interesting comes down to primarily its setting and visual design, and I'm willing to wager that these will be the main aspects that people will focus on when discussing this game. It doesn't take long for players to identify the developer's primary influences, which most notably include BioShock and Half-Life. The DNA of these games is very much intertwined into what makes Industria so alluring. Much in the same way, BioShock's Rapture or Half-Life 2's City 17 play an important role in the overall tone and atmosphere of these games. Industria's fictional city of Hakavik is similarly an intriguing and mysterious setting that propels the story and main gameplay loop across a roughly 3 to 4 hour campaign. In Industria, you play as Nora, a young woman in East Berlin in the late 1980s at the height of the Cold War, who is awakened by an ominous phone call from her partner, implied to be her boyfriend, Walter. From the brief conversation, you can immediately infer that Walter is a scientist of some kind working on a mysterious project called Atlas.
Hello?
This also comes
Nora
at a
Saul,
time
I'm
when
here.
Nora first learns of the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Walter?
Given this dramatic
Wait,
political
I just
development,
came in from
it
the
seems
office. I
that the
just fell
German
asleep on a
secret police,
sofa.
the Stasi, are after
You're just
Walter's
dreaming about
work at
really
the
weird
nearby
things.
research facility.
Are you still in the office working?
The foreboding nature of Walter's phone call prompts you to head over to the research
Where is
facility,
everyone?
which you find empty and in disarray. Without giving too much away, in a sequence that
Oh
seems
my god, what
very
is
Half-Life
happening?
inspired,
Why is the
you are
chicken cut
eventually
back?
transported to an alternate reality, the city of
Walter!
Hakavik,
Are
in
you
search of
here?
Walter. Upon your arrival, the city appears to be completely abandoned and devoid of human activity, with the only inhabitants of the city seeming to be robotic creatures that become hostile at mere suggestion of your presence. Shortly afterwards, you encounter the only human NPC in the game, a wheelchair-bound man named Brent, who not only saves your life, but subsequently guides you along your journey and fills in the missing details regarding the world and how it came to be in
What?
its present state. Brent himself has
I
his
don't know
own
who you
melancholy
are, but if you
backstory
want to
which
live longer
unfolds
than
over the course of
5
your
minutes,
adventure,
you
adding
should
to the
probably
richness of
get
the
the hell
world,
out of there.
despite being
Then
otherwise
tell me
barren.
how!
The elevator needs power. The steam machines through the door underneath me are your only hope.
Who are you? Hey, wait, come back!
As you explore your new environment, there's also a wide variety of letters, journal entries, and other bits of flavored text that help flesh out the world as well. The story is divided up into 5 or 6 levels, each interrupted by a brief yet surreal interlude presented entirely in black and white. Here, you traverse what seems to be a large library or archival building only to enter a dark and empty theater where you witness some bizarre performance art before proceeding to the next level. What is perhaps most disappointing about the story, however, is its length. This is probably the other main point that I think most people will focus on when discussing the game. Conservatively, Industria clocks in between 3 to 4 hours, though if you are aggressive, you could probably complete it in between 2 to 3 hours. While the game's length may be a turnoff for some, what's more disappointing is that the story just ends very abruptly. There is very little closure when the credits roll, and ultimately, without spoiling anything, it just does not feel very satisfying at all. Considering that Industria was made by a small indie development team, the visuals in Industria are fairly impressive, if not competent at the very least. I won't lie to you and tell you that Industria is a graphical powerhouse or a technical showcase for the latest graphical hardware. Instead, what makes Industria shine and what struck me as most impressive during my playthrough was the overall art design and visual style. The initial section set in Berlin really captures the communist-style architecture in its design. While I never spent any time in communist East Berlin, I did spend some time in Poland in the early 1990s, not long after the fall of communism there. I can say from personal experience that the developers really nailed the feeling of that era. Again, the aforementioned archival building reinforces the sterile, minimalistic design with its large square concrete pillars and bright circular light fixtures.
Newspapers saying those things our best scientists could be dreaming.
Walter.
Hakovic
Walter
itself,
Rebel.
however, has a more French or German city feel, albeit a post-apocalyptic sci-fi take with large robotic structures littering the streets and buildings, and large electric cables snaking along the ground, somewhat reminiscent of Half-Life 2's City 17. That, coupled with the robotic enemies patrolling the area, really adds a sense of immersion to the world. As the game's name implies, there are also elements of the Industrial Revolution, with areas that appear to be large factories with steam-powered machinery, really adding to the unique aesthetic of the setting. While I doubt anything will ever replicate the experience of going to Rapture for the first time in BioShock, or first setting foot in City 17, Industria does at least partly replicate that feeling of experiencing a new and unique setting. Otherwise, models, animations, environmental detail, lighting and particle effects are all nice, again impressive considering that this is from a small indie development team. It bears mentioning that Industria does support ray tracing, which can at times enhance the visual experience,
Well,
though in my playthrough,
I'm just a
this seemed to come
traveler.
at the cost of performance, even on an RTX 3080.
Well, I mean, after saving your life, I kind of expected just a tad more information.
Moving on, the sound design in Industria is one of the more surprising
I come
aspects,
from
in a completely positive way. Industria's
different
music, while
place.
sparse and
And I'm
infrequent,
just here to look for
consists
someone in my
primarily
life to
of
do something
ambient and
for me.
melancholy synth-driven tracks which capture and enhance the overall mood of the game. While most of the time you'll be traversing the world in relative silence, reinforcing the feeling of Hakovic's emptiness, with only the music
Thank you.
coming in to punctuate and heighten the importance of crucial moments in the story. The sound effects are also well done, with the weapon sound effects being a
Well,
particular
maybe then you
standout.
just missed him. Maybe you just.
Each of the weapons conveys a sense of weight and impact owing to their fantastic sound design. You can really feel the force of the shotgun or the SMG with each pull of the trigger as you dispatch your robotic foes.
Walter! Walter!
While the voice acting is serviceable, with the performance of Nora and Walter being just okay, the performance
How
of
did you
Brent is a
expect me to
clear
find him?
standout who really steals the show with some terrific voice acting, lending to the wistful and
All
melancholy
open for
nature of his
suggestions,
story.
Mr. Hidden Microphone Man.
You see the building on the hill, where all those cables lead to? That's the town hall. Well, it used to be.
And?
Just go there. It's safe up on the hill. And you might find information about your missing... What was the name?
Walter. Walter Rebel.
Right. And don't die, please. I'm actually starting to enjoy our conversations.
When it comes to gameplay, Industria is a fairly standard by-the-numbers first-person shooter. Initially, you begin the game unarmed, but you soon come across a
What's that?
pickaxe, which is the game's primary melee weapon type. This also feels like a nod to BioShock and Half-Life with their iconic wrench and crowbar melee weapons respectively. This is primarily used to break down debris in your path and loot crates scattered across the environment. Surprisingly, the first hour or so of the game does feel reminiscent of a survival horror game given the lack of ammo for your weapons, forcing you to scavenge the surrounding areas so that you feel like you always have enough to take on future enemies. There is also a flashlight mechanic to help you illuminate dark areas. This adds to the sense of dread and tension as you explore new, dark, and dimly lit areas, all while having to scrounge around for batteries to make sure that your flashlight always has power. In addition to the pickaxe, there are 4 other weapons, including a pistol, submachine gun, a shotgun, and a rifle. Again, the shooting doesn't do anything novel or inventive. It has a slight clunkiness to it that feels much like the shooting in BioShock or Resident Evil 7 and 8. It is a touch slow, but it's very deliberate and precise. That being said, it's still very satisfying to dispatch your robotic enemies again, primarily owing to the great sound design of the weapons, which feel punchy and are a blast, no pun intended, to use. Healing is done via health vials, which you collect throughout the environment and can be used when needed at your discretion. As mentioned earlier, the game is divided into 5 or 6 levels with some small open areas and nooks to explore, but for the most part, they are a fairly linear affair. There are also some very, and I mean very, light puzzling elements which feel primarily front-loaded in the game's first half. These are incredibly straightforward and don't pose any real challenge whatsoever. Again, influences to Half-Life can be felt here as well, as some puzzles task you with finding valves to open doors, or some simple physics-based puzzles to help you access a new area, though sometimes these can amount to simply stacking some crates to climb up to a previously inaccessible area. These puzzles don't add or detract in any meaningful way to the game, and mostly feel like they are there to help with the pacing.
Activate was evacuated 10 years ago. Has it already been that long?
So, ultimately, what does this mean for you? Should you go out and buy Industria? Well, that depends. Industria boasts an atmospheric and at times truly unique and impressive world with some great art direction, sound design, and story elements. The game really does a great job of absolutely nailing its setting and era, which feels wholly unique and something I haven't experienced in a video game many times before. While the shooting and gameplay doesn't offer anything new or groundbreaking, it's the world that really hooks and draws you in. For Industria, there are 3 potential downsides depending on what you value in a game: the length, the story, and the price. By today's standards, a 4-hour campaign, and that is a very conservative estimate, is incredibly short. That being said, having been developed by a small team, I think that that's forgivable, especially considering that I genuinely enjoyed almost every minute in the game. What's less forgivable is what feels like a throwaway ending that is jarringly abrupt and ultimately not very satisfying. The big elephant in the room is whether or not the $20 asking price is worth the price of admission, especially since we live in a time when there is so much emphasis on the value proposition of games and how much time we can get out of them. I'll fully admit that $20 seems steep for a 3 to 4 hour experience, but given how much I enjoyed my time with Industria, I can confidently recommend this game. I especially think that fans of games such as Half-Life and BioShock will find something here to enjoy. In fact, it's hard for me to tell whether or not part of the reason I enjoyed Industria so much is because it reminded me of those games and was just tickling the nostalgia centers of my brain. If you're on the fence about getting Industria or the price tag seems like a deterrent for you, I'd recommend wishlisting it on Steam and picking it up when it's on sale. In fact, at the time of this posting, the game is 15% off on Steam for $16.99 US. All in all, I think that Industria is a very admirable and inspired first effort from Bleakmill Studios, and I think that they deserve all the credit and support that they can get. Well, that's it for my review of Industria. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you disliked the video, give it a thumbs down. If you have any helpful comments or suggestions, as this is my first video game review, please sound off in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Thanks.